So I just want to share that I've been a practitioner for just over 20 years, and I've been able to use data to make decisions for direct student support services that I've been involved with, in particular residence life, financial aid, career and transfer services, academic advising, just to name a few. And disaggregating data has allowed me to advocate for improvements in some of those services. So I'm really excited to learn from our next presenter, who will encourage us to embrace data. I think I heard someone else say they're a little data averse. Assess our practices and implement strategies to put data into action in an effort to improve our policies and practices for students. Amanda Janice Roberson is the Senior Director of Strategic Engagement, Planning, and Operations at the Institute for Higher Education Policy, also referred to as IHEP. Amanda will share lessons learned from the National Degrees When Due initiative, giving us an opportunity to connect those examples to our own experiences. We will focus on the benefits of disaggregating data to get a better sense of our students and engage in a thought-provoking conversation on how to use data to inform our campus decisions regarding policy and practice improvements. At the conclusion of Amanda's presentation, we will have some time to ask questions. So again, please write down anything that might come to mind that you'd like to ask. We'll then proceed with several opportunities to reflect on what Amanda has shared and actually begin doing some action planning with the intention to make data-driven decisions and put data into practice. Please note, again, we'll be referencing materials in the Bitly account, and those can be found in the Institute for Higher Education Policy session folder. And now let's welcome Amanda.
I'm here to talk about advancing re-engagement and student success, but using data to do so. Data is one of my favorite topics in the world to talk about. I come from a federal policy background, and so I love translating the importance of data into using it on the ground to support students and advance their success. As Donna mentioned, my name is Amanda Janice Roberson, and I work with the Institute for Higher Education Policy. All right, cool, that's an advance. If you are unfamiliar, IHEP is a nonpartisan, nonprofit research, policy, and advocacy organization committed to promoting access and success in higher education for all students, regardless of race, background, and circumstance. We have a few focus areas for our work. Those are affordability and need-based aid, data and transparency, completion, and barriers in justice and education. And the work that I'm going to talk about today is very centrally focused in our completion pillar, but our data and transparency work sort of transcends and goes across some of those buckets. And before I dive into the background and lessons learned from this work, I know Jersey was incredibly active in our Degrees When Due initiative, so I'm curious, by a show of hands, how many of you either engaged with Degrees When Due or are familiar with it? All right, so that's a solid number. So that'll be what I'll start with, will be a bit of a recap for those of you who were actively engaged in Degrees When Due, and I'm really excited to share this work with those of you who are less familiar. So as we heard earlier, just to set the stage, 40 million Americans have some college and no degree, and about 2.9 million of those are potential completers or near completers. And at IHEP, one of our ethos is that higher education is a path to a better living and a better life, but only if students are able to access, afford, and complete that college education. And we know we're looking at an enrollment cliff, and there's been a lot of focus on the high school to college population, but it really misses this critical population of adults. Many of the barriers that caused near completers to stop out were due to barriers or structural inefficiencies within our system, and some of these barriers disproportionately impact students of color, Black, Latinx, or Hispanic, Indigenous, and underrepresented AAPI students, and students from low-income backgrounds. And as long as these barriers and inefficiencies exist, we're not going to be able to adequately support today's students. And this is an equity issue, meaning it's very close to IHEP's heart, but it's limiting their social and economic mobility, and that really disadvantages all of us. So the Degrees When Due initiative underscores the importance of completion and of re-engaging stopped-out students and helping them to get across the finish line. So about Degrees When Due, enough of my preamble. What is this initiative that I'm going to talk about? It was a nationwide degree completion initiative that engaged nearly 200 institutions across 23 states and helped them to re-engage stopped-out students and develop more equitable practices to help students across the degree finish line. Specifically, Degrees When Due sought to equip institutions with research-informed strategies to help them with what we call degree reclamation, which is both adult strategies. And that included identifying and re-enrolling near completers, those students who have earned credits but have yet to complete a degree, identifying and removing, importantly, those barriers and supporting students along their entire pathway to and through college, and re-engaging adult students who have already started but have stopped out, that some college no degree population that we're all so very focused on. Degrees When Due institutions really had 4 primary goals and objectives. So first was to increase post-secondary attainment, and I'll say that I imagine many of these goals and objectives are very much aligned with the work that you all are doing, promoting equity in higher education, building institutional capacity to support students, and establishing sustainable policies and practices that can continue to serve students after the conclusion of the Degrees When Due initiative. So our participating institutions went through a 9-month online learning experience that was paired with ongoing support from coaches, and I helped the institutions assess some of those existing policy and practice barriers that are disproportionately impacting students of color and students from low-income backgrounds, helping them to improve their data collection and analysis, to really help understand and communicate the impact that the Degrees When Due initiative can have, and creating systems that better serve today's students through to graduation. And we heard a bit from Re-Up earlier about some of the barriers to completion, some of the motivations, and so the next couple of slides are really to show some of the very similar findings that we had from our qualitative work as part of Degrees When Due. And Degrees When Due zeroed in on institutional barriers to completion and found that some were easy to fix, some a little less easy to fix, but in some cases there are barriers that students and staff know about, but the roadblocks just haven't been addressed yet. And this initiative was one way to do so. This could include things like computer literacy or wellness requirements that are often well-intentioned but outdated and can present unnecessary barriers or obstacles to completion. And Degrees When Due, our central focus was to arm institutions with the data that they need to provide, to prove that these open secrets exist. We have a database, evidence base for those, and provide leadership with the evidence needed for change. Degrees When Due also underscored the need for student support to meet students where they are, and I think we've heard that quite a bit as well. Because many are motivated to return. They want to come back for a variety of reasons. And it sounds obvious, but I feel like it bears repeating. And we know that students stop out for a variety of reasons, and if institutions can't address those reasons that are within their realm of control, they can't expect the students are going to be able to return and succeed. So a few examples of what we saw at our Degrees When Due institutions, returning adult students needed things like flexible course schedules that worked with their work schedules, access to prior learning assessments so they're getting credit for learning that they've done outside of the college environment, and support staff that understands their needs and their unique needs at that. Returning adult students also express the need for less complex and burdensome processes to reapply and pay for college, as well as the intentional inclusion of adult learners on campus. In short, they needed a sense of belonging, which is understandable. We all want to belong somewhere we're spending lots and lots of time. And it's true of all students, but how institutions can create that sense of a belonging has to fit the populations that they're trying to reach. So the belonging needs to be specific to adult learners. And now to the data. Data have been a really important tool for us as part of the Degrees When Due initiative, and really they're an important tool in all adult re-engagement and reverse transfer work. And it's not just assessing the data once, it's assessing and reassessing the data as part of a full process to identify students and identify those barriers in policy and practice that are stopping them from completing. We put out a degree reclamation playbook, which you'll see both on the screen, but is in that bit.ly link in the folder. And it walks through the steps of reverse transfer and adult re-engagement, which includes analysis of data not only to identify the students who have stopped out, but to help you understand why. So in conjunction with policy and practice analysis, institutions can use their data to understand where and when their students are stopping out, identify some of those obstacles, and change policy to better serve students. This playbook is really a distillation of 10 years of research and work that we did with institutions to break down the process into hopefully 10 understandable steps with a lot of resources in the appendix and throughout to help you all on your journey. Ahead of the 10 steps, we do encourage institutions to complete what we call the strategic assessment. This is a questionnaire that asks institutions to really do a deep dive into their policies and practices and their strategies and their capacity to do this work for re-engaging adult learners and their organizational capacity to do it comprehensively. We are going to come back to this strategic assessment. I just wanted to plant the seed now while we were talking about the playbook. So as I mentioned, there are 10 steps to the degree reclamation playbook, and I'm not going to talk through each of them in deep detail. Instead, I want to focus on those that are particularly related to our conversation today around the importance of using data to support student success and improve institutional processes. Step 4 is to dig into the data. So this helps walk through institution teams how it can examine its data, including parameters and recommended fields, and how you can apply an equity lens when you're figuring out who has stopped out, who may be a near completer, and who we can help across the finish line. The playbook in the appendix does include some activity guides from some data-focused workshops that we facilitated as part of the Degrees When Due initiative that could be helpful to your campus teams. Step 6 really focuses on identifying students and how you go about doing that, and that's through degree audits. Through the degree audits, institutions were required to analyze their data and disaggregated data at that, looking at subpopulations like age, race, and ethnicity, and income. And through this, Degrees When Due institutions identified more than 170,000 students as potentially eligible for a degree. And of that number, just over 10,000 had attained a credential when we released this report last year, with 3,000 more on track to do so. And so over the course of 3 years, which included 2 and a global pandemic, it was pretty clear to us that institutions can implement Degrees When Due strategies, but it's going to take time to really move the needle on attainment outcomes. So just want to set realistic expectations that it's so important and the immediacy of doing the work is there, but it can take time to see results. So while efforts to support students across the finish line are ongoing and they do take that time, the data show that nearly 1 in 10 near completers that was contacted by their institutions did re-engage and re-enroll. So it can lead to some immediate enrollment impacts. Outcomes of degree audits showed that many near completers were pretty close to getting their degree. They were within a few credits. So among the population of near completers analyzed through Degrees When Due, 1 in 4 students was within 6 credit hours of completing an associate's or bachelor's degree, and 42% were within 15 credits. So nearly half of near completers would be able to cross the finish line after 1 or 2 semesters of coursework. So it's it's worthwhile to do. I feel like I've belabored that point. The final step of the playbook, step 10, really focuses on sustaining strategies that support re-engaged and adult learners. So I recognize that you probably can't read all of this in detail. This chart is, in fact, in the Degrees When Due, the Degree Reclamation Playbook. But we know once you dig into the data and you have started to contact students, you're engaging them, you're trying to get them back on campus, you'll uncover some pretty common re-enrollment barriers, often surfaced either through data analysis or through conversation. And this allows you to be able to coordinate on some potential solutions and think about some of those the policy and practice change. So both some of the high impact, low effort ones that are that Re-Up discussed, but also some broader systemic changes that you can start to seed on your campuses. There are examples here, both academic and non-academic, and I encourage you to dig into those a bit. And I'll note that there are some potential solutions included here as well, but those are going to vary by institution and context. What works will depend on your campus, and we hope that the examples are helpful in sort of guiding you as you're digging into your data. Changes to these common barriers can help institutions act within the factors that they can control to be able to welcome students back onto their campus, but also make sure that students don't leave campus in the first place, depending on what those barriers are. And so we need to think about sustaining that policy change through the reassessment and assessment of data, but we recognize that that's not a one-time proposition. We're not asking you to do this analysis once, you've done it, cool, we can walk away. No, it's something that we have to routinize into our processes. So we recommend considering things like creating work plans to ensure that these cycles are embedded either on a semester or a yearly basis. Again, assessing and reassessing, establishing reoccurring meetings that are a priority for the staff team and include a variety of campus stakeholders, community partners, or state and regional leadership as needed. Setting up a shared drive for team members to share documents, share institutional knowledge, because I recognize that turnover can also have impact on teams, and so want to make sure that you have that knowledge as institutionalized and centralized as possible. Designating a lead who can be a champion for degree reclamation in both the short and long term. And then I think importantly, aligning your degree reclamation efforts with your institution's strategic plan. So as we think about driving policy change, particularly within the strategic plan context, we recommend doing an analysis where you can look at the policy and practice changes that you have been tracking and align those with your institution's strategic plan. This will help you make a clear case for change. We recommend that you review the institution's strategic plan and use a rating system, a pretty simple one, either 1, not aligned, 2, somewhat aligned, or 3, perfectly aligned, to assess how different policies and practices that you've identified align with institutional priorities that are included in that plan. And I would note that even if your plan doesn't include specific equity goals, it's an important, I think, assessment to do as part of this process, regardless. So this slide shows an example of this sort of from our work with the Degrees When Due institutions and highlights a financial barrier discovered as part of the data analysis and the policy and practice review. So essentially they found that the college was charging a $75 graduation fee to cover expenses relating to verifying degree eligibility. But they found that this wasn't aligned with the strategic plan because it created a potentially unnecessary barrier to degree completion for their students. So they identified a couple of steps to improve alignment. So looking at the resources that were generated by the fee, based on this analysis, consider whether or not it's feasible to get rid of that fee. And if that wasn't feasible, then considering an alternative source of funding or maybe embedding that into the student fee at the beginning of the semester or the beginning of the year, so it's not a barrier at the end of the students' journeys. And in terms of equity considerations, they found that this fee was similar to a regressive tax in that students from low-income backgrounds were disproportionately affected. It was a higher percentage of their incomes than it was for wealthier students, and that's not strategically aligned with their plans. Another part of sustaining these efforts is communicating the value of adult learner re-engagement. It's not enough that we have the data, we have to talk about it, and we have to talk about it in a way that's accessible, which can be wonky and it's difficult to do. I have a background in talking about why we need a federal student level data network, and it gets wonky really fast. You have to make the connections about what does this mean for students on the ground, what does this mean for student success on your campuses. And so using both data, the quantitative data, as well as student voice can be really critical in demonstrating the impact of this work and ensuring that you maintain the support for these strategies to be sustained. So student voices can be used to enhance outreach to other students in presentations, in social media, a variety of print materials, and in reports to various stakeholders and funders potentially. We recommend outreach to students who have either re-enrolled or received a degree after being re-engaged, and asking them to provide a written testimonial or a video testimonial based on a variety of questions that you sort of predetermine. For the quantitative data, I would recommend considering measures that are included in your institution's strategic plan and the way in which this work contributes to you meeting those goals. And in addition to more traditional measures like enrollment and graduation, also consider measures like credit completion or GPA increases or student debt resolution. Percentages and numbers can be really useful talking points, but having that student voice to surround those can be really critical in helping make the connections between why investing in additional capacity is important or a variety of other policy changes you'd like to see. We also recommend that when sharing data, you consider things like establishing a baseline so you can see change over time. That can really help you communicate impact. Compare students engaged in these efforts to post-secondary outcomes of other groups, either the overall student body in your region, in the state, and then again, identifying equity gaps and outcomes for specific groups of students by using that disaggregated data. Then you can leverage these to garner additional support from senior leadership on your campus, from regional and state leadership, and these can be used in meeting communications and some of those printed deliverables that I spoke about. Everyone's going to be interested in those paired together. Each on their own, it's either anecdotal or it can be too wonky, but together is really, I think, where the magic happens. And I'm going to walk through a couple of examples from degrees when due institutions where they sort of they harnessed their data, they used it in practice, and then I'll have a poll for you all to participate in. So sort of overall, we've talked about data being an important tool to bringing an equity lens and digging into this disaggregated data because it can reveal barriers that disproportionately affect different student populations. And this was really the equity focus of degrees when due. I wanted to highlight the policy and practice barriers that could have otherwise been overlooked without this emphasis. So sort of across the board, what we saw was that some student groups were more likely to face certain academic or non-academic barriers than others. So for instance, remaining course requirements, math requirements, and unique institutional graduation requirements appear to disproportionately impact Black near completers and those from low-income backgrounds. Non-academic barriers to completion also appear to disproportionately affect Latinx or Hispanic near completers, so they're more likely to experience things like financial holds or registration or advising holds, and have accumulated excess credit, which isn't a good use of their time or money. And then we saw sort of across the board that students from low-income backgrounds were overrepresented in nearly every category of non-academic barrier. So investing that time in examining the disaggregated data, interrogating why certain student groups on campus may be overrepresented as near completers or with earned but unawarded credits, can help support policy and practice change to better serve those groups and can start to see some of those closures and equity gaps in completion. Another example, a more specific example I'd like to share is at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. One of the big successes that they saw on campus as part of Degrees When Due was being able to secure and use their data to support credit flexibility for students, especially those who had been previously overlooked. So when the team reviewed and really deeply engaged with their data, it increased their awareness of some of the barriers to completion and helped them consider how they might provide students with more flexible means of accruing credit. So specifically, team members found in the data analysis that a student could take a math class 6 times without receiving a passing grade. And some folks were really frustrated by that, especially since some of those students were eligible to take a were eligible for credit by exam, but an institutional policy required that they were enrolled in a credit-bearing class to take the exam, which was presenting a cost barrier to some of those students. And so this led to conversations on their campus about their prior learning assessment policy to help them ensure more credit flexibility. And this analysis also helped them to think about more online courses, so thinking back to some of those barriers for adult students, having that flexibility around their work engagements. Leaders were able to engage with their eCampus to identify other flexible options for the some college no credential population, since not all of these potential students have the time or ability to attend classes in person. Shasta College is another good example of sometimes this work takes time and effort, but it can pay off. So Shasta College is in Northern California. It's a smaller college in Northern California, and they decided to identify students who had stopped out between fall of 2013 and spring of 2018, had at least 45 credits and a GPA of at least 2.0. The IT department pulled 4,500 students who met those criteria, so lots and lots of students. But Shasta didn't have the capacity to be able to do the batch audits of student transcripts. They had to do it manually, and that takes a lot of time. They had to go through all of the transcripts by hand to figure out which students had coursework that was compatible with existing academic programs to determine degree eligibility. And because this is so time-consuming, they had to limit that initial group. And so they focused on a subset of 575 students who had 60 units or more when they left with no degree or certificate, and they took courses that would have tended to transfer. So thinking transfer level math, English, communications, and a critical thinking class. And so after a long manual review process, they found that almost half, 252 of these students, had completed all of the academic requirements for a degree. And after contacting them, they were able to award 250 degrees. The last example I'll provide is Anoka Ramsey College in Minnesota, and they were able to explore some of the anecdotes they heard on campus, but through their data. Students often noted that there was a health and wellness requirement that was a barrier to success for them that wasn't included in the transfer curriculum for the state. One team member referred to it as an open secret, that it was an obstacle, but there were some faculty on campus that felt pretty strongly about maintaining that requirement. So the data collected and reported through Degrees When Due confirmed that the health and wellness requirement was the only course standing between more than half of the identified near completer students from earning an associate's degree, which strengthened the argument on campus for them to consider its removal. And so because of this data, the institution was willing to come to the table, and they started a task force to review this requirement and explore this as a barrier to degree completion. And so now I have a quick poll, because I want to get a sense from you all how this resonates. So if you go to menti.com, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Mentimeter, if we've used it already today, and use code 2143-5291. I've got a couple of questions for you. So just wanted to pressure test, have you and your campus use data to identify barriers to student success? How much of what I've talked about today resonates with you? and work that you're already actively doing or have done on campus. All right. It looks like the results are pretty overwhelming and really heartening. That's great. And unsurprising given that you all are all here today. So we have the vast majority are using data, you're using data on your campus to identify barriers to student success. And now I'm going to ask for an answer that requires just a couple of words. What are some challenges you've experienced in using data as a tool for policy and practice change? So this can just be a couple of words, doesn't have to be super in-depth, but I'm very curious. Data integrity, people, accessibility of data, dirty data, inaccurate data, data inconsistencies, staffing shortages, data silos, that's a big one. Data doesn't embrace the human element or human interaction. We've always done it this way. That is a hard one. Institutional change is slow. That's very, very valid. Bias in data. Data integrity, accurate data. Well, thank you, everyone. This all very much resonates with what we heard from institutions as part of Degrees When Due, but also just in my work with institutions as we thought about developing data-informed campus cultures. The work is hard, and there are lots and lots of barriers that are in front of you when you do this work, but it is super, super important to do. And so we're going to come back to some of those challenges, I think, as we have our activity in a little bit. So as we've talked about, data can be an important tool for storytelling on campus. And last year we released a report called Lighting the Path. And this gives a pretty detailed overview of our work within Degrees When Due, some key takeaways, some recommendations for both states, institutions, and the federal government for ways that they can better facilitate these processes and ultimately improve student success and student success strategies. I am not going to read through all of the policies to you. This document is also in that bit.ly link, so if you're interested in digging into it. But I do want to talk through the ones that reinforce some of the themes that we've heard today about data analysis and the reanalysis process. So first, it is imperative to invest in data. A lot of the things that I saw on that challenges screen reinforce that it is important to invest both in data and data systems and breaking down silos, but also the human capacity to analyze high-quality disaggregated data to help you identify some of these barriers to student success and opportunities for change. This can, as we talked about, can help inform some of those conversations about needed changes on campus, and some of those changes are also included in the institutional policies here that I'm not going to dig through. The next one that I think reinforces what we've talked about today is routinizing data analysis and degree audits. A consistent process of evaluating student transcripts can help ensure that students stay on track to complete degrees and that they're awarded credentials that they've earned. It's all about routinizing the process. We're not one and done when we're doing this data work. And the other recommendation that I'll flag is for states, and I think is evident in this meeting today. States can play a really big role in facilitating the implementation of student success strategies for the Some College No Degree population. They can coordinate and facilitate efforts across institutions by building priorities into state attainment goals and strategic plans. They can also provide forums for institutions to learn from one another, to learn from what's happening in the field, what works, discuss common challenges, and brainstorm new ways forward. They can also connect degree reclamation efforts to other state priorities and help collect data and report on progress and outcomes. So we've seen some pretty lasting impacts from our Degrees When Due campuses, with folks still remaining committed to doing the work and enacting some of the hard policy and practice change that is needed to remove barriers to student success. Through our community of practice to policy, we worked with a few of our Degrees When Due states, including New Jersey, to think about what policy and practice levers exist and the ways in which they can help facilitate that change that's really grounded in the important work that you all are doing day in and day out. I'm really energized and excited to be here. I'm glad that I was able to join, and IHEP can be a resource for you all as you're doing this work, and we are happy to be. So with that, I want to open it up for any questions that folks may have. Well, if we don't have any questions, I will be here through the rest of the afternoon, so if there's anything you'd like to chat about, I'm absolutely happy to do that. But we have an activity for you. That strategic assessment that I promised earlier, it's your turn to get started with that. So as a quick reminder, recap, the strategic assessment is designed to help you start to have a conversation about understanding the priorities, policies, practices, and strategies that you employ at your institution related to adult re-engagement, as well as your capacity to take on this work. There's also space for reflection at the bottom of each section. If there are any notes or conversation that you're having at your table that can't be fully captured by the rating scale, and you should all be receiving copies from the team. They're passing around those now, and the directions are included at the top of each page. So we ask that you use the next 10 to 15 minutes to work on these with your teammates. A couple of quick caveats before you dive in. You very likely won't finish this in 15 minutes, and that's okay. You also may have additional questions that you need other team members to weigh in on, so it's important to take this back to your campus for your broader team to engage with. So go ahead and dive in.